Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Grish, and I am a member of the Hilton Head MLK Committee for Justice. Today, we are talking to Caroline McVitie, who is with the Gullah-Geechee Land and Cultural Preservation Task Force. Welcome, Caroline. We are glad to have you with us. Can you please explain your role with the Gullah-Geechee Land and Cultural Preservation Task Force?
Am merely a member of the task force. The task force consists of 9 members, and the majority are Native Islanders. When I say Native Islanders, I'm talking about people who are the descendants of the former slaves who acquired these island lands following the end of slavery. So as you can imagine, their roots go back for generations, and the original Native Islanders were identified as Gullah people. I know that's an unusual term, but that's largely because it was the specific dialect that they spoke, which was a blend of various Native African languages and English.
And Caroline, what is the purpose of the task force?
Well, the town council established the task force about 4 years ago, and the goal is and has been to identify and assist in preserving the Gullah-Geechee culture. And this was to detect and resolve issues specific to that culture and the community. This included heirs property issues, taxes, land use, economic and sustainability issues, and generally an improved quality of life through ongoing education and seminars and workshops. In short, I would say it identified the issues that unduly encumbered Native Islanders and their historic lands.
Heirs property. What exactly is heirs property?
That's an interesting question. Heirs property is land that's been passed down, often through generations. Technically, it would be without a will and without going through probate. And it's someone who has died more than 10 years ago. In most cases, the original owner has been deceased for generations.
How does heirs property affect Native Islanders today?
I can best give you an example of this by my personal experience. I first came to Hilton Head Island in 1975. At that time, you can imagine, most of the islanders, the original islanders, were farmers and fishermen. When our island became incorporated in 1980, in the 1980s, in other words, when government was asserted, with the incorporation, zoning and land management ordinances and other regulations and restrictions were imposed on the land. As extensive land development came to the island, infrastructure was added, taxes increased, everything changed for Native Islanders. For instance, to live in our island community today and build or make any significant structural changes to your property or to subdivide it, you have to get a building permit or a zoning change. Now, that sounds simple, but aside from being very costly, a building permit could be issued only if the owner could show title to the land. Consider that original Gullah lands were often passed down from generation to generation, and the actual original owner was long since dead. As a consequence, over time, perhaps maybe as many as 100 people might own a small portion of that land. And in many cases, the heirs might be scattered across the world. It's only when each heir is contacted and releases or sells his or her title to the land that an owner may get clear title to the land and improve, develop, or even sell his or her property as he sees fit. This can cost upward of $25,000 or more. And also consider that some land speculators found Native Islanders easy prey and bought up the land cheaply, So that today, more than a quarter of these original historic lands have been lost, and with it, a whole culture has disappeared.
This process can take years, but what changed over the years that affected these historic lands? Why is it relevant today?
Well, consider this. A historical parcel of land owned by a native islander. Let's say he managed to hold on to his land, and he also has maybe some chickens and some goats or a large vegetable garden on his plot. As the islander surrounding land was sold and developed, expensive housing projects rose next door. This increased the taxes as his land was subject to assessments according to his neighbors. Now the native property owner was taxed in a much higher bracket, maybe taxing him right out of affordability. To add insult to injury, neighbors might complain about the presence of livestock on the property. And in theory, under zoning laws, maybe the livestock were not permitted any longer. Or let's say that they were. Even then, a neighbor might complain about a crowing rooster, or let's say a dog barking. And that might subject this landowner to nuisance laws and fines. So let's assume that this landowner decided to sell his eggs or vegetables in front of his property. In order to do so, he might have to get a business license, costly. And he would have to observe all the regulations tantamount to that business license, such as signage, parking regulations, hours of operation. In other words, there are too many encumbrances just from the addition of government to this community that once was able to govern itself.
I see. So what attracted you to this initiative?
Well, what attracted me to this initiative is that I have always been interested in social justice. My training as a lawyer only served to pique that interest. And what attracted me to the plight of the native islanders was the incredible changing landscape. Remember, I first came to the island in 1975. By the time I settled here more than 30 years later, the landscape had changed dramatically. It wasn't until I joined the Planning Commission in 2012 that I understood why this was no longer the island I was first attracted to.
And how did the task force address these issues?
Well, with the support of the town council, we were able to hire a consulting firm to assess the landscape, to talk to native islanders and make recommendations for change. This wasn't the first such effort by the town. More than 25 years ago, a consulting firm came here and conducted a study and recommendations that were largely concentrated on the northern end of the island. Many of those recommendations have been initiated, but largely the life of the native islanders did not change. So when our consultant recommended a variety of actions to make the landscape more equitable for native islanders and to preserve this valuable culture, the town created a new staff position to interact with native islanders and manage issues that needed to be addressed. After an extensive search, the town was able to hire Dr. Cerise Dubose, and she is the Historic Neighborhood Preservation Administrator. One of the first things she did with the aid of the town staff was to propose revisions to the town management ordinance to create an overlay district for these historic neighborhoods. In effect, that would give a lot more leniency to these landowners to develop their lands, to subdivide, and to make good use of their lands without the heavy burden of cumbersome ordinance requirements.
Finally, what can our citizens do to advance this initiative?
The most important thing I can think of that we can do is really to educate ourselves about the history of this island, the real history of the island, perhaps starting with a tour of Mitchellville. The rich culture of this low country is not in the expensive gated communities that dot our landscape, but it's really in the lots of preserved culture and in these historic neighborhoods. You can identify the historic neighborhoods by signs when you travel along Route 278. There are two charitable organizations that I would recommend that we all consider supporting. The first is the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, and that's located in Charleston, but there are numerous branch offices. The second is the Pan-African Family Empowerment and Land Preservation Network. I know that's a big name. That is located in Beaufort. And what they do is they assist with all matter of services for Native Islanders. They've helped countless numbers of people, of residents, fight tax sales and foreclosures. They provide workshops and other resources to help landowners retain their properties. So I would consider donating to them or to your local legal aid organization.
Thank you, Caroline, for being with us today and for all of your good work.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.